I now give the floor to Her Excellency Ms. Therese Kaikwamba Wagner, State Minister, Minister for Foreign Affairs, International Cooperation and Francophonie of the Democratic Republic of the Congo.
Merci. Monsieur le Président, Excellences, Mesdames.
Mr. Presidency, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, members of the Council, I would like on behalf of the Government of the Democratic Republic of Congo to congratulate France on its presidency of the Council this month in April. Thank its delegation for organising this meeting, as well as the interactive dialogue last week. I would like to welcome my brother, Mr. Tete Antonio, Minister for External Relations of Angola and Chairperson of the Executive Council of the African Union. And I'd also like to welcome the Special Envoy, the Secretary General for the Great Lakes region, and the Executive Director of UNICEF, and representatives of members of the Great Lakes region. Since the adoption of SERV Resolution 2773, 54 days have passed, marked by expectations, inertia, and ongoing violence. On the ground, nothing has changed. There's still violations, tensions are worsening, and peace still remains out of reach. The report of the Secretary General is unequivocal. Goma and Bukavu airports are still under the effective control of the M23 RDF. In the occupied areas, there are summary executions, abductions, enrolled forced conscription, and abuses of fundamental human rights. Even more serious abuses have taken root, the imposition of a parallel political and legal order based on force, flouting the sovereign authority of the Congolese state. This dynamic of predatory political and military behavior is accompanied by another emergency situation just as tragic, the humanitarian crisis. As UNICEF and the Secretary General say, this has reached a critical threshold. More than 1.5 million new IDPs, entire areas cut off, and increased attacks against camps, displaced persons and healthcare centres. The budget cuts imposed upon UNHCR, furthermore, is seriously compromising the intervention capacity. The needs are mushrooming, resources are collapsing, and hope is ebbing away. A solemn call is something that we are launching to the international community. The humanitarian emergency in the DRC cannot wait. It is our moral duty to act, but also regional stability depends on it. The flow of refugees to neighbouring countries is further undermining already precarious socio-ecosystems. In a context of protracted occupation and attempts of imposed repopulation, the return of displaced persons and refugees is very sensitive. Poorly managed, it will become fertile ground for future conflicts. In English,
Adoption of Security Council Resolution 2773 marked a turning point. It carried the authority of this council, and yet, 50 days later, the situation on the ground remains unchanged. The RDF M23 coalition continues its violation as if the Council's will had never been expressed, as though the resolution were destined to remain a dead letter. We say otherwise. This resolution is a living instrument adopted to protect lives, restore legality, and preserve peace. And millions of lives in Eastern DRC still await its full implementation. In this context, regional momentum must be reinforced and unified. We commend the tireless efforts of President João Lourenço, the African Union-appointed mediator, whose steadfast engagement helped maintain political dialogue despite repeated deadlocks. We also welcome the recent appointment of President Faure Ezosima Gnassingbé of the Togolese Republic as a new mediator. The Democratic Republic of the Congo expresses its full support for this tenure, which signals a renewed commitment to elevate the process at the highest political level. We also express our profound gratitude to the Emir of Qatar for his sustained commitment to peace and security in the region and supporting regional efforts. In parallel, we welcome the efforts carried out under the joint aegis of the East African Community, EAC, and the Southern African Development Community, SADC, notably through the virtual summit held on 24th March 2025. These regional initiatives are valuable, but they must now be streamlined around the singular process led by the African Union facilitation. Only a centralized coordination backed by strong and recognized African leadership can avoid the dilution of efforts and bolster the credibility and impact of regional commitments. This also calls for more coherent international support. The Office of the UN Special Envoy for the Great Lakes region can no longer be limited to supporting a single instrument, the 2013 Peace, Security and Cooperation Framework, whose revitalization is long overdue. It must be reconfigured with a clear mandate, rooted not in one agreement alone, but in the realities on the ground. Its role is essential to anticipate crises, support African-led mediation, and ensure alignment between regional initiatives and international response. The scale of the security challenges, transboundary threats, the collapse of trust mechanisms, and the entrenchment of impunity demand a strengthened, legitimate, and fully operational office. But we must also speak plainly. None of the decisions stemming from regional processes have been implemented. This is not simply a matter of institutional weakness. It reflects a repeated refusal to uphold commitments without consequence. Mr. President, the time for implementing Resolution 2773 is long overdue. The M23, along with its backers, must now comply with the authority of this Council by immediately, fully, and unconditionally withdrawing from the Congolese territory, ceasing all obstruction of humanitarian operations and the execution of MONUSCO's mandate, and halting all attacks on civilians, displaced persons camps, hospitals, and schools. But as clear as these measures may be, they will remain ineffective without a credible verification mechanism. As highlighted by the Secretary General in his report, violations persist with complete impunity, and the regional verification mechanisms outlined in the Luanda process have proven inoperative, in large part due to the non-participation of certain states. The DRC therefore proposes the establishment of a strengthened monitoring mechanism anchored in the Security Council's existing structures. The group of experts under the 1533 sanctions regime, working in coordination with MONUSCO and the Office of the Special Envoy for the Great Lakes region, could be tasked with producing regular, verifiable reports based on clear indicators and formally transmitting them to the Council and the Sanctions Committee. Such a mechanism would reinforce the reach of the resolution and provide the Council with a concrete and responsive accountability tool. Ground-level monitoring, especially of ceasefire and compliance with Council resolutions, lies at the heart of United Nations peacekeeping. MONUSCO, in that context, remains the most appropriate and capable extension of the Council's presence in the field. It remains, to this day, the only entity with the mandate, presence, and operational capacity to fully carry out that role. The DRC reiterates its full confidence in the United Nations and its representations in the DRC and the region. We firmly condemned the repeated, baseless, and undignified attempts to delegitimize the UN, its missions, and their leadership, attacks systematically spearheaded by Rwanda. This double standard is untenable. A state simultaneously contributing troops to peace operations and benefiting from the appointment of a special representative of the Secretary General, and at the same time leading a defamatory campaign against the United Nations, all while profiting from its legitimacy to sustain its military apparatus and salvage what little remains of its international reputation. Monsieur le Président,
Mr. President, as part of their support for Resolution 2773, some stakeholders have already mobilised by imposing targeted sanctions against Rwanda and the M23. This needs to be commended. A decision of the Council must be followed up, in particular when it is flagrantly violated by a state that contributes nonetheless to peacekeeping operations. Buoyed by these measures, the Council must henceforth ensure its own decisions be respected. We've seen from experience targeted sanctions and political pressure work. They change the balance of power, reduce external force, and promote changes of stances. It is high time to integrate them in a structured multilateral response. And being accountable must not be perceived as a threat. No one should be sent to hell for having defended the Charter of the UN. The Democratic Republic of Congo is thus calling for the formal recording of the non-respect of Resolution 2773 by Rwanda, for setting up a monitoring mechanism with progressive coercive measures, for sanctioning the RDF chain of command and those political decision makers in charge to withdraw Rwanda's status as TCC, to impose an embargo on Rwandan minerals from the illegal exploitation in DRC, and setting up a mandatory alert system on arms transfers to Rwanda. These measures are based on facts, on the law, and on the mandate of the Council. Without this, it is clear that Rwanda and the M23 can cause the total loss of the Council's authority, not only in the eyes of the Congolese people that have been ravaged for more than 3 decades, but also in the eyes of everyone throughout the world who still believe in the universal vocation of the Council. So, ladies and gentlemen, while this Council is deliberating, the people in Goma, Bukavu, and the east of the DRC are suffering on a daily basis from the consequences of this inaction. They are not forgotten. Their suffering is visible. Their resilience warrants our respect. Their dignity remains intact, and our national unity is unshaken. Before hopes inspired by 2773 fade away, the DRC calls upon the Council to decide on the organs that need to implement it, to clearly evaluate the impact of its non-respect and consequences thereof, including through targeted sanctions, and by setting up a monitoring mechanism guaranteeing accountability. Whilst this Council is deliberating, the people in the east of the DRC continue to suffer the consequences of inaction. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, members of the Council, I would like to conclude my statement with a brief foray into history. April is a month of remembrance when we commemorate the Rwandan genocide. This tragedy, the genocide against the Tutsis, this tragedy rightly has struck people throughout the world. But this tragedy also caused another tragedy, a lengthier and often silent one, that of the Congolese people. For 30 years now, the east of the DRC has suffered the fallout of this initial horror. It absorbed alone the shock of regional instability, born from those who committed genocide fleeing, and from the proliferation of armed groups with a logic of endless reprisals. This situation is derived from decisions inter alia taken in 1994 by the international community under the auspices of the Security Council, in particular through Resolution 918. This encouraged the Zaire authorities at the time to open their borders to take in Rwandan refugees. These decisions, taken because it was a humanitarian emergency, actually imported the conflict and enabled those responsible for the genocide to dig in within our country. Since then, the DRC has been characterized by recurring cycles of violence and intervention that were initially justified by so-called security reasons, but actually is to do with exploitation of our resources. We call this a genocost, a genocide motivated by the pursuit of profit, by destroying the people who live above the coveted riches, a project of terror and human devastation that is still in operation in our most richest regions, using warped security pretexts. Breaking out of this cycle requires more than just resolutions. We need to recognize humanity and other people's suffering. It is from this standpoint that we affirm the FDLR must not stay in the DRC. They must go home to Rwanda. Their presence serves as a convenient pretext for unjustified intervention. Rwanda must recognize this reality as part of its own legacy. It is time to close this chapter once and for all, to stop recycling the FDLR as documented by the UN group of experts. We would like to say this very clearly. In the DRC, no community is persecuted on ethnic grounds. The allegations of this targeting are false. They're fabricated to justify serious violations of international law. Finally, we would like to reiterate another tragedy in the Great Lakes region that for too long has remained in the shadows, the genocide of the Hutu in Burundi in 1994, perpetrated in silence. It cost the lives of tens of thousands of civilians. We commend Burundi's approach with the United Nations to achieve this recognition. The DRC fully supports this initiative to serve fair and conciliatory remembrance. If we want April to become a month of shared memory and not instrumentalized memory, we must all, countries, peoples, institutions, dare to look at history in its total complexity without ranking suffering and without manipulating those who have died. Thank you very much. I thank the Minister of State for her statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Rwanda. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, I want first to thank his Special Envoy Shea for his comprehensive briefing, as always, and thank you for your efforts. We thank also UNSC Executive Director for your comprehensive briefing. Thanks to the Honorable Minister of Foreign Affairs of Angola for his comprehensive briefing, and I also thank Council members for your thoughts on the subject matter. Mr. President, Rwanda begins with reaffirming our sincere commitment to regional peace and cooperation. We remain supportive of the regional processes, and we believe regional processes are the most effective path to durable peace and security in our region. Partners from the region and beyond are all calling for peace, a long-lasting solution that will take into consideration the concerns of all parties. Rwanda shares this position and is willing to do its part to achieve this goal. Mr. President and Council members, the Security Cooperation Framework was signed in 2013 as a landmark initiative, a bold and collective commitment to end the recurring cycle of conflict in DRC and by extension the region. It was meant to address the root causes of instability and build mutual trust among states and among the peoples of the region. Mr. President, Council members, yet 12 years later, we are still confronting the very same challenges that the Peace and Cooperation Framework was designed to address. Key pillars of the Peace and Cooperation Framework was addressing the root causes of the problems, disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration of armed groups, and still remains to be resolved. Instead, we are witnessing the continued presence of foreign and domestic armed groups mushrooming, which pose a significant threat to the region and to DRC itself. In this connection, Council members, FDLR remains the most security threat in the region. Despite more than 20 Security Council resolutions passed in this Council since 2003. Today, FDLR continues to recruit, train, and commit atrocities, including sexual violence, ethnic cleansing, and mass killings. Now, FDLR has graduated to being integrated into FARDC before your own eyes. This is no longer a secret, but a fact based on the reports of the Secretary General presented in this Council. Therefore, FDLR and FARDC coalition undermines both regional stability and the Peace and Cooperation Framework itself. No country, Rwanda included, should accept the existential threat posed by such groups. Entertaining or legitimizing the FDLR, or even tacitly supporting this armed group only exacerbates the conflict. Mr. President, Council members, 12 years since the Peace and Cooperation Framework was signed, it is time for a candid evaluation of its implementation. The root causes of conflict, ethnic discrimination, armed groups proliferation, and impunity continue to foster in DRC. Resources have been spent, resolutions adopted, yet we are far from being from square one. Mr. President, Council members, despite these challenges, Rwanda remains optimistic and committed to full implementation of the Peace and Cooperation Framework. We are convinced that under the supervision of this Council and in coordination with the regional partners, we can break free from the cycle of violence and bring lasting peace to our Great Lakes region. In this regard, Mr. President and Council members, Rwanda proposes the following steps to support full implementation of the Peace and Cooperation Framework. Number one, disarm and neutralize the FDLR and all its splinter groups. This Council should ensure the full enforcement of its resolution with no selectivity and hold accountable to all those who support and collaborate with FDLR. Number two, condemn hate speech and ethnic incitement in DRC. The Security Council must take a firm stance against the hate speech and xenophobia in the DRC that fuels violence, divisionism, and persecution of Congolese Tutsis. Third, support regional joint efforts through the PSC and SADC processes. Rwanda calls on the UN Security Council to fully support the ongoing African-led processes which provide the best chance to reach a lasting peace in our region. Complementary initiatives in this process, Rwanda welcomes them through the confidence-building measures undertaken by the state of Qatar, as it further supports the current positive momentum. Rwanda also welcomes the recent visit to the region by the United States Senior Advisor for Africa, Mr. Mossad, and we welcome their pragmatic approach aimed at addressing the root causes of the problems. And fourth, strengthen the role of the Special Envoy in the region. We call on the Special Envoys of the Secretary General to work in close coordination with the EAC and SADC-led processes. His good office should align with the regional mechanisms to ensure a unified international support. And fourth, we demand ownership by the DRC itself. The DRC must confront its internal contradictions. Externalizing or scapegoating Rwanda for its own problems will not solve the problem. Blame games have become their business. But this is just a painkiller. They must own up this issue. I also wish to emphasize one thing, that the continued violation of hardly obtained ceasefire by Wazalendos, a militia allied with FARDC, without any condemnation by the Council, is a total lack of ownership of the processes, and the DRC relegates political responsibility to militias. Mr. President, in closing, Rwanda remains fully committed to the Peace and Cooperation Framework. We continue to believe its promise, but that promise will only be realized if it's supported by the genuine accountability, regional alignment, and bold political leadership of DRC, the region, and this Council. We call on this Council to stand firmly behind the regional efforts of EAC and SADC and to ensure that the Special Envoy's mandate is used effectively to support and complement these initiatives. Rwanda looks forward to working with all partners to transform the Great Lakes region into a zone of peace, stability, and permanently get rid of armed groups and the legacy of genocide. I thank you very much, Mr. President.
I would like to thank the representative of Rwanda for his statement. Special Envoy of the Secretary General for the Great Lakes region. You are very welcome. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, distinguished members of the Council, Excellency, Madam Minister, State Minister, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Democratic Republic of Congo, Your Excellency, Minister of Foreign Relations of the Republic of Angola, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, ambassadors, distinguished members of the Security Council, thank you very much indeed for giving me this opportunity to present the report of the Secretary General, which takes stock of the situation in the Great Lakes region. In preparation for this statement, I toured the region. That led me first to Angola, then to the Democratic Republic of Congo, to Burundi, to Rwanda, and then to Uganda. It was thus my honor to speak with heads of state or ministers from these countries, as well as with some members of the diplomatic community and civil society, and in particular, Congolese women. I pay particular tribute to them for their unfailing commitment to peace despite the difficult conditions they're experiencing. Over and beyond the points that I would like to bring to the attention of the Security Council as Special Envoy of the Secretary General, I would also today, Mr. President, like to convey some messages from actors of the region, bearing in mind, of course, the question that is of concern to us all. How can we capitalize on the various different peace initiatives underway and, in fine, achieve lasting peace in the east of the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is the epicenter of the deep-rooted crisis that has lasted for more than 30 years now? Mr. President, on the 27th of March, my colleague Bintu Keita, head of MONUSCO, presented here to you a comprehensive picture of the security and humanitarian situation in the east of the DRC. So I'm not going to go back to that, but I would just like to remind you this unambiguous call, despite the calls from the Security Council, from regional and sub-regional organizations in Africa, and also from the European Union, and despite the restrictive measures and sanctions that have been imposed, fighting is ongoing in the east of the DRC, and the Congo River Alliance M23 has continued its territorial expansion with external support. Despite statements of intent, a ceasefire is not yet effectively in force, and violations of international law and human rights are ongoing. Furthermore, the humanitarian crisis is worsening both in the DRC and also in some neighboring countries, in particular Burundi, Uganda, and Rwanda. They have seen an increase in the number of new arrivals from the DRC. This somber reality means that we have to strive to redouble efforts to see how together we can transform recent political and diplomatic progress into an irreversible shift to peace. To this end, the first message of hope that we should bear in mind is that recent developments regarding the so-called Nairobi and Luanda peace processes, as well as the efforts of the African Union and the joint initiative of the EAC, the East African Community, and also SADC, have made significant strides and given new impetus to efforts to resolve the crisis. We need to recognize these. We need to encourage them and support them. despite the challenges that still exist. Indeed, the fact that the heads of state of the EAC and SADC adopted a roadmap on the 24th of March during the last joint summit, a roadmap that lays out immediate, medium-term and long-term measures, as well as the appointment of a facilitators group, which includes 2 distinguished women from Africa, is significant progress. I'd like to pay tribute to President João Lourenço, President of the African Union, for the immense work carried out as part of the Luanda process. The achievements of this must be preserved. Here, I'm thinking about the agreement on a CONOPS, a concept of operations to neutralize the Force de Libération du Rwanda, FDLR, and the lifting of defensive measures of Rwanda, which, if applied fully, will significantly contribute to mitigating tensions between the DRC and Rwanda. I would also like to commend the appointment of President Faure Gnassingbé from the Republic of Togo as African Union mediator for resolving the crisis between the DRC and Rwanda. Along the same lines, I am delighted with the dynamism created by the Doha Initiative. I'd like to welcome the meeting initiated on the 18th of March in Doha by the Emir of Qatar, Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, between President Felix Tshisekedi and President Paul Kagame, as well as the various consultations with Qatari facilitation that ensued with delegations from the DRC, Rwanda, and the Congo River Alliance M23. These steps are a crucial turning point in efforts seeking to bring about a ceasefire on the ground and a de-escalation of tensions between the DRC and Rwanda. Furthermore, the resumption of exchanges between the Burundi and Rwandan security services could well contribute to a de-escalation of tensions between these 2 countries. All these efforts show that peace is still possible. This is why, and this is my second message I'd like to convey, it is important for the parties to demonstrate good faith and to be prepared to compromise during negotiations to find a lasting settlement to the conflict in the east of the DRC. In this context, the new resolve of the Congolese government to engage in direct dialogue with the M23 is an important step towards finding a solution to the crisis. Given the serious nature of the crisis, obtaining an immediate, unconditional ceasefire and reaching agreement on reopening humanitarian corridors should, in my opinion, be the primary issue on the agenda of discussions between all parties concerned. These should include women and young people. We hope to see them involved as parties to the dialogue. Political negotiations should rapidly translate into a real change of the situation on the ground that is so yearned for by the people, in particular by the women of Goma, Bukavu, and Beni. It was my great honor to talk with them. They want arms to be laid down, and they want humanitarian assistance to get to them unhindered. To this end, we hope that the consultations held on the 28th of March between senior military officials from SADC and the Congo River Alliance M23 will lead to the swift reopening of Goma Airport. Mr. President, according to some authorities in the region with whom I spoke, and along the lines of the Doha communique of the 18th of March, the Doha Initiative seeks to strengthen trust by supporting African initiatives that are underway. This should be warmly welcomed. While all efforts seeking to bring about a settlement to the crisis are welcome, it is important that these initiatives dovetail with efforts from the region. My third message also seeks to reiterate the importance of close coordination and consistency between the praiseworthy initiatives started outside of Africa and regional peace processes. Indeed, taking such an approach would help to harness the comparative advantages of each approach and the achievements that have already been made in order to create complementarity and a unity of vision, but also to achieve in a systematic, structured way a robust and uncontested peace agreement. Such an approach would also enable stakeholders in the international community who so desire to better plan how they can support the peace efforts and to implement decisions which stem from them. Distinguished members of the Council, peace efforts will remain vain if real political resolve to tackle the root causes of the chronic instability in the region do not exist. What we've seen to date is that there is competition in terms of political ambitions and security ambitions, and these have been openly stated in terms of strategic areas of interest. They have been upheld by the existence of multiple armed groups. There's been the illegal exploitation of natural resources, and also we see the absence of the state's authority in these areas. So this indubitably is something that moves away from the spirit and the letter of the Addis Ababa Framework Agreement. I would like, therefore, to take this opportunity to reiterate my call to all signatory countries to respect the commitments undertaken under the Addis Ababa Agreement. Its revitalization process needs to continue unfailingly. Here, I would like to thank President Yoweri Museveni from Uganda, who has committed to host the 12th Summit of the Regional Mechanism for the Framework Agreement in May. I would urge the Security Council, through its discussions today, but also through its usual diplomatic channels, to tap into its influence and to use all levers at its disposal to reiterate its support for the peace process underway, to urge stakeholders in the region to work together sincerely in order to bring about a definitive, lasting settlement to the crisis by promoting the respect for international law, but also dialogue and compromise. Well, that is something that should be an obligation for all parties, because it's the very lives of civilians that depend on this more than ever. For my part, my office, in cooperation with regional and international stakeholders, and also the United Nations agencies involved as part of the Plan of Action for the United Nations Strategy for the Great Lakes region, that was recently updated for 2025-2027, my office will continue to support regional peace processes. We'll also continue to support economic, security and judicial initiatives between countries in the region, and of course promote transparent and inclusive management of natural resources, because this is one of the main levers for resolving in a lasting fashion this crisis that has lasted for far too long. Thank you. I would like to thank the Special Envoy of the Secretary General, Mr. Huangxia, for his briefing and his messages. And I'd now like to give the floor to the Executive Director of United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF, Ms. Catherine Russell. You have the floor, Madam.
Excellencies, good afternoon. It's very good to be here for this important discussion on the deepening humanitarian crisis in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. I'd like to thank Ambassador Bonifant very much for convening and hosting this briefing during France's presidency of the Security Council. The Security Council's continued attention to children affected by armed conflict in the DRC is more critical now than ever. Excellencies, the significant escalation of conflict in the eastern region of the DRC has reached levels not seen in the last 3 decades. The intensifying violence has created one of the world's worst humanitarian crises, leaving millions of children at risk. Since January, more than 1 million people, including an estimated 400,000 children, have been displaced by violence in the eastern provinces of Ituri, North Kivu, and South Kivu. This new wave of displacement comes in addition to the more than 5 million people in the region who were already living in displacement camps, where crowded and unsanitary conditions increase the likelihood of diseases such as mpox, cholera, and measles. Excellencies, I'd like to draw special attention to the most defining and horrifying feature of this conflict, the rampant violence being committed against children and women. Scores have been killed or injured. There has been a 100% increase in verified grave violations against children in the first quarter of this year as compared to the first quarter of 2024. These include indiscriminate attacks, large-scale recruitment and use of children, collective abductions of children, as well as widespread sexual violence. The rate of sexual violence against children has reached shocking levels. Reports from child protection partners show that children make up more than 40% of the nearly 10,000 cases of rape and sexual violence reported in January and February alone. UNICEF estimates that during the most intense phase of this year's conflict in eastern DRC, a child was raped every half hour. This clearly points to a systemic crisis in which rape and other forms of sexual violence are being used as weapons of war to destroy lives, families, and communities. Please bear in mind these numbers represent only the cases that have been reported. The true figure is likely significantly higher, hidden by fear, stigma, and insecurity. This sexual violence against children is an abomination and demands condemnation and urgent and collective action. Cases of abduction of children have also increased 6-fold between December 2024 and February of this year. These increases are accompanied by reports of other serious violations of children's rights, including killing and maiming of children and threats by armed groups against children living on the street. In addition, repeated mass displacement and the disruption of essential services have created ideal conditions for the spread of endemic diseases. Children under 5, many of whom face chronic malnutrition already, are especially at risk of disease. DRC also remains the epicenter of the outbreak of the new mpox strain. Of course, the mpox response continues to be heavily impacted by the conflict. For example, most of the 143 mpox patients in isolation units in Goma had to flee for safety, making it nearly impossible to provide them with care and increasing the risk of the disease spreading beyond DRC's borders. At the same time, healthcare facilities have been overwhelmed, and medical supplies are being quickly depleted, including post-exposure prophylaxis, or PEP kits, used to treat rape survivors who may have been exposed to HIV or other sexually transmitted infections. Since the start of the year, more than 2,500 schools and learning spaces in North and South Kivu, including those in displacement camps, have been forced to close, putting children at further risk. Schools play a crucial role in times of crisis, providing stability and a safe place that protects children from sexual violence and recruitment by armed groups. Making matters worse, violence and insecurity are undermining commercial trade and the ability of humanitarian actors to reach children and families in need. At least 11 humanitarian workers have been killed since January. Humanitarian premises and warehouses have been looted. including the 2 Mpox treatment centers supported by UNICEF in Goma and UNICEF's warehouse in Bukavu. Partners who have largely relied on MONUSCO's maintenance of core infrastructure that facilitates humanitarian access, including roads and airstrips, are now experiencing challenges in reaching remote areas because of the MONUSCO drawdown. Despite these challenges, UNICEF is staying and delivering for children and families in Eastern DRC. Key operational staff have remained in Goma and Bukavu, along with our NGO partners throughout the worst of the fighting. UNICEF's response is focused on the provision of life-saving assistance to reach people most in need in displacement sites and host communities. UNICEF interventions include emergency water trucking, rehabilitation of water supply systems, establishing chlorination points along Lake Kivu, and distribution of emergency wash supplies. We are now reaching 700,000 people a day in Goma with clean water and sanitation. In addition, UNICEF has been supplying medicines and medical equipment, including PEP kits. We are working with partners to provide support to survivors of sexual violence and to assist children with mental health services. And we are supporting registration and care for unaccompanied and separated children so they can be reunited with their families. But this is far from enough, and the humanitarian response is facing a critical funding shortfall. In 2024, UNICEF received only 20% of the funding required to address the urgent needs of children and families in Eastern DRC, leaving millions without access to life-saving aid. Recently, we launched an urgent appeal for nearly $57 million to provide emergency assistance to children in the Eastern DRC over the next 3 months. If the funding crisis isn't urgently addressed, hundreds of thousands of children in Eastern DRC will miss out on screening and treatment for malnutrition, on life-saving medicines and vaccines, on safe drinking water, and on psychosocial support. UNICEF echoes the call for an immediate cessation of hostilities and the full implementation of Security Council Resolution 2773, which calls for de-escalation, dialogue, and protection of civilians, especially children. We urge all parties to the conflict, those who support them and those with influence over them, to work collectively and decisively toward peace. We urge all parties to the conflict to respect their obligations under international humanitarian law and human rights law, particularly those related to the protection of children. We call for full accountability for those who recruit children, commit sexual violence, or target civilians. Impunity must not prevail. Excellencies, in closing, I urge Council members to commit to several actions that are critical to alleviating the humanitarian crisis in the Eastern. We offer these children something else, hope. Merci beaucoup.
Je remercie.
I thank the Executive Director for UNICEF, Ms. Catherine Russell, for her comments and for her appeals. And now I give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Tete Antonio, Minister for External Relations and Chairperson of the Executive Council of the African Union. You have the floor, Excellency.
Merci. Excellence, Monsieur.
Thank you, Excellencies. Ambassador Jérôme Bonafont, Permanent Representative of France to the United Nations and President of the Security Council for the month of April.
Je salue.
I welcome the presence here with us of Ambassador Huang Sha, Special Envoy of the Secretary General for the Great Lakes region. And I also welcome the presence of Ms. Teresa Kayikwambe Wagner, State Minister, Minister of Foreign Affairs, International Cooperation and Francophonie of the DRC, and of course, Ms. Catherine Russell, Executive Director of UNICEF. Mr. President, I should like to begin by extending my warmest congratulations to you and your team for your presidency of the Council this month, and I wish you every success. And at the same time, I thank you for your indulgence and the indulgence of all members of the Security Council, enabling me to participate in this fashion. We welcome the introduction of the SG's report, just provided by His Excellency Huang Sha, Special Envoy of the UN Secretary General for the Great Lakes region, and we thank him for his tireless efforts to achieve peace and stability in the region. Mr. President, The report that has just been presented reflects a general approach to the current state of the security situation in the GLR and analyzes the main and recent political developments in the region. We note with concern the worsening security situation in some countries in the region. This represents a setback in collective efforts for peace in Africa. We also share the concerns expressed in the fields of politics, protection of civilians, human rights, and food security. Despite this situation, we are optimistic, and we would highlight the initiatives taken by regional leaders through high-level political engagements with the aim of restoring confidence and promoting peace and stability in the GLR. Distinguished members of the Council, regarding the Democratic Republic of the Congo, we express our deep concern at the continued deterioration of the security and humanitarian situation in the east of that country. The occupation of important cities such as Goma and Bukavu by the M23 and the consequent advance of its forces into new territories, which, in addition to escalating the conflict, threatens the territorial integrity of the DRC, worsens the humanitarian situation of local populations, and contributes significantly to undermining the diplomatic efforts undertaken within the scope of existing mediation processes. We welcome all efforts made to find regional peace and stability, in particular the concerted actions at the level of the Southern African Development Community, SADC, and the East African Community, EAC, and the search for peace in Eastern DRC in conjunction with other international actors. Furthermore, we highlight the holding of the joint SADC-EAC summit held on February 8th in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, which, in addition to calling for a ceasefire, reiterated the need to resume direct negotiations and dialogue with all state and non-state actors, including the M23 group. It also approved the roadmap that defines measures for immediate implementation in the short, medium, and long term to achieve sustainable peace and security in Eastern DRC. Moreover, the meeting of the African Union Peace and Security Council at the level of heads of state and government held in Addis Ababa on February 14th, 2025, urged the parties to take advantage of the progress achieved within the framework of the Luanda process. The meeting highlighted the fact that there is no military solution to the conflict and called on the parties to prioritize diplomatic and political commitments, calling for the immediate resumption of negotiations with all state and non-state actors. As recommended by the EAC-SADC Joint Summit, and the Peace and Security Council also endorsed the proposal aimed at strengthening, coordinating, harmonizing, and complementing the Luanda and Nairobi processes, as well as the appointment of additional facilitators to support them in consultation with the AU Commission. In this regard, the virtual summit I've referred to, which took place on March 24th, 2025, recommended the appointment of a panel of facilitators composed of 5 eminent African personalities. Distinguished members of the Council, in view of the considerable progress achieved under the Luanda process, namely the consensus reached between the DRC and Rwanda regarding the neutralization of the FDLR and the withdrawal of Rwandan Defense Forces from Congolese territory, through the elaboration of the concept of operations, His Excellency Mr. Lorenzo has continued to commit himself to this process. And he dedicated himself more to the presidency of the African Union and left the role of mediator to another head of state. It is worth remembering here that direct negotiations between representatives of the DRC government and the M23 were planned, but in extremis, they were aborted by the M23, referring to the sanctions that had been imposed on them by some countries and organizations outside the continent. That was all under the same process, and it was in these circumstances that the AU Conference Bureau meeting on the 5th of April considered and endorsed His Excellency Faure Gnassingbé, President of the Togolese Republic, to assume the role of mediator appointed by the AU for the conflict between Rwanda and the DRC, to continue the efforts initiated by His Excellency João Manuel Gonçalves Lourenço, President of Angola. And thus, on April 12th, the Assembly of Heads of State and Government decided by consensus through the silence procedure and in accordance with the Assembly's procedural rules to appoint His Excellency Faure Gnassingbé, President of the Republic of Togo, as AU mediator to continue diplomatic efforts to resolve the crisis. In the same vein, President Lourenço today received in Rwanda, Thursday, the 16th of April, 2025, the President Faure Gnassingbé to exchange views on this new mission which the African Union has just entrusted to him. In this context, the African Union Commission was directed to develop, in consultation with relevant parties, a unified roadmap for the mediation process, building on the progress achieved through the Luanda and Nairobi processes, and in this way reaffirmed the leadership of the African Union in resolving conflicts in Africa. We welcome the diplomatic initiatives of the United Nations, other international organizations, and countries of goodwill that are interested in contributing to the prevention, management, and resolution of conflicts in Africa, as long as they are aligned with and coordinated with the AU agenda. Allow me to take this opportunity to express our gratitude for the support provided by countries in the region, regional and international organizations, and international partners, in particular, the confidence shown by members of this Council in the Luanda process and in the diplomatic efforts undertaken by His Excellency João Lourenço, President of the Republic of Angola. Excellencies, we understand that peace, security, and stability in the DRC resides in the points of convergence contained in the resolutions and decisions of the UN Security Council, the African Union Peace and Security Council, and the joint SADC-EAC summits. These are, namely, the unconditional implementation of an immediate ceasefire, the immediate cessation of hostilities, return to the negotiating table without preconditions, implementation of an effective verification mechanism, withdrawal of foreign forces from DRC territory, neutralization of FDLR forces, cessation of support for armed groups, and full respect and strict compliance with deliberations of African regional mechanisms and the UN Security Council, including Resolution 2773. Sincere dialogue among the sons and daughters of the DRC is also essential. As the current chair of the AU chairmanship, we reaffirm our readiness to continue supporting diplomatic efforts to restore the stability and development of the DRC and to facilitate the rapid implementation of coordinated, inclusive, and harmonized commitments based on the Luanda and Nairobi processes. Mr. President, the CAR has taken significant steps towards stabilizing the country following the implementation of the joint roadmap for peace in the Central African Republic adopted at the Third CIRGL mini-summit of heads of state and government held in Luanda, Angola. However, we note with concern the emergence of attacks in February 2025 carried out by the rebel group Coalition of Patriots for Change, CPC, against governmental forces, the UN Multidimensional Stabilization Mission in the CAR, and the civilian population in the north and center of the country have put into question all pacification efforts for this long-awaited peace. Mr. President, allow me to express our concern as well about the security situation in the Republic of Sudan, a member country of the Great Lakes region which is facing an armed conflict that began 2 years ago. It is of great concern to the African Union. We express our deep concern about its negative impact on the Sudanese people and on the region. The Republic of Angola argues that the situation of the conflict prevailing in Sudan involves political diplomatic dialogue. Mr. President, on this point, speaking of Sudan, we encourage the efforts and the initiatives of His Excellency Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, President of the Republic of Uganda and coordinator of the Ad hoc Presidential Committee responsible for mediating that conflict. The situation in the Republic of South Sudan is of great concern to us. Mr. President, given the impact of conflicts in Africa, the Angolan presidency of the African Union proposes holding a conference on conflicts in Africa in order to contribute to finding solutions in the face of the multifaceted scenarios facing the continent. It is also important to highlight in this context the recommendations of the most recent African Union summit to establish a panel to review the peace and security architecture of the African Union. More specifically, on the Great Lakes region and today's consideration, we believe that the review of the peace and security architecture of the African Union will be an opportunity to implement the proposal made by the Republic of Angola as President in Office of the International Conference of the Great Lakes region towards the recognition and accreditation of this organization as the African Union Regional Mechanism for the Prevention, Management, and Resolution of Conflicts in Africa. Finally, we believe that these steps will allow the adaptation of the African Union's peace and security architecture to the current situation, with a view to effectively contributing to the objective of silencing the guns and ensuring peace as defended by the UN Security Council. Thank you. I thank His Excellency, Mr. Tete Antonio. I thank him for his briefing, and I thank him as well for referring to the African Union's action with regard to other crises. And I will report to you that the Security Council addressed the situation in South Sudan this morning. And I thank colleagues for allowing you to participate in this fashion at today's meeting. I now give the floor to members of the Council who wish to make statements. I will begin with the Permanent Representative of Somalia.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of A3+, mainly Algeria, Guyana, Sierra Leone, and my country, Somalia. We express our sincere appreciation to Mr. Juan Shah, Special Envoy of the Secretary General for Great Lakes region, for his comprehensive briefings and continued engagement in support of peace, security, and stability in the region. We also thank Ms. Catherine Russell, the Executive Director of UNICEF, for her comprehensive briefings. We welcome the participation of His Excellency Tete Antonio, Minister of External Relations of the Republic of Angola and the Chairperson of the Executive Council of the African Union, for his briefings. And we also welcome Her Excellency Mrs. Teresa Kayowamba Wagner, State Minister of Foreign Affairs, International Cooperation, and the Francophone of the Democratic Republic of Congo, and the representatives from Rwanda and Kenya to this meeting. Despite the continued diplomatic efforts by countries in the region in addressing the ongoing challenges, the road ahead remains long. Mr. President, A3+ remains gravely concerned about the escalation of violence and armed group activities in eastern DRC and the potential impact on the security situation in the region. We are particularly concerned about the severe impact on civilians, including women and children, and the heightened risk of regional destabilization. We unequivocally condemn all acts of violence and violations of international law, including international humanitarian law. Mr. President, A3+ calls for calm and encourages more efforts to restore good neighborhoodness, address differences through peaceful means, and deepen cooperation among countries. The interconnected nature of challenges in the region demands a continued focus on dialogue and good neighborliness. We therefore strongly urge an immediate cessation of all hostilities and calls for the resumption of inclusive dialogue. We welcome the adoption of the joint EAC-SADC roadmaps, which establish a coordinated framework of political and security measures to de-escalate tensions and bring lasting peace to eastern DRC. This framework must be preserved, reinforced, and implemented with the constructive engagement of all parties. In pursuit of peace and security in the region, we must address the security challenges in the region with priority given to violence and continued attacks by armed groups in the DRC. We commend the continued commitment of President João Manuel Congavas Lourenço and the chairperson of African Union in advancing the peace process and look forward to the new role of the President of Togo, Faure Ezozima Kasajimba, an AU-appointed new mediator in the DRC. We also express our appreciation to His Highness, the Emir of Qatar, for facilitating the meeting between the President of Rwanda and the President of DRC. Moving forward, it's essential to strengthen coordination among regional and international initiatives to ensure strong coherence, complementarity, and alignment. On this latter point, we stress the need to avoid duplicate tracks, thereby running the risk of undermining the peace process. The A3+ recalls the Security Council Resolution 2773, and we recognize MONUSCO's vital role in supporting the Congolese authorities and facilitating civilian protection. As we continue to engage in addressing the security challenges in the region, we must not overlook the humanitarian crisis in the region. The humanitarian situation in the region is taking a tragic turn. We are deeply concerned by the displacement of millions of civilians who have been forced to leave their homes, attacks on health facilities, and unconscionable incidents of sexual violence and forced recruitment of children. We call for unrestricted humanitarian access and urge the protection of civilians from the attacks of armed groups. The protection of civilians must be central in all efforts toward peace and stability in the region. Mr. President, the Peace, Security, and Cooperation Framework for the DRC and the region remains a cornerstone for the stability of the region. We call the revitalization of this important framework and urge all signatories to honor their commitment and immediately cease any support to armed groups operating in the region. We also stress the importance of the framework's revitalization process in this juncture and call on signatory countries to support this. To achieve lasting peace, we must address the root causes of instability in the DRC and the Great Lakes region. The illicit exploitation of the natural resources underdevelopment, and insufficient state presence and poor governance in affected areas. We therefore condemn the unauthorized and destructive activities of armed groups in the protected natural areas in the DRC, which undermine efforts for the protection of the forests and biosphere and environmental as a whole. We call for an enhanced effort to safeguard these assets. A3+ fully supports the implementation of UN strategy for peace and consolidation in the Great Lakes region. Our position remains firm, anchored in support of inclusive dialogue, guided by the principles of national ownership and African solution to the African problems. We express our firm support for the merged Luanda and Nairobi processes as decided by the EAC and SADC summit, and urge Rwanda and DRC to engage fully in this process, prioritizing the peace and stability of the region. In conclusion, we reaffirm our unwavering commitment to the unity, sovereignty, territorial integrity of the Democratic Republic of Congo and all states of the region. The path to sustainable peace lies in the political solution founded on the dialogue, respect for international law, and steadfast support for regional peace initiatives. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the Permanent Representative of Somalia for his statement on behalf of the A3+1. And I now give the floor to the representative of Slovenia.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wish to thank today's briefers, Special Envoy Mr. Huang Xia and Ms. Catherine Russell, Executive Director of UNICEF, as well as His Excellency Tete Antonio in his capacity as Chair of the AU Executive Council. The Great Lakes region continues to face complex challenges related to security, humanitarian situation, and human rights. These pressing concerns urgently call for coordinated and measured responses to pave the way for enduring peace and progress. Regional stability is intrinsically linked to the stability of Eastern DRC. We reaffirm our commitment to the sovereignty and territorial integrity of DRC and all countries in the Great Lakes region. And we support all efforts towards durable peace, recognizing the region's central role in this. It is deeply regrettable that despite concerted calls from regional and international actors, including these councils through Resolution 2773 and joint appeals from the ESC SADC Summit and the African Union for an immediate cessation of hostilities and the withdrawal from occupied areas in the Eastern DRC, these appeals have yet to be heeded. As noted by today's briefers, achieving sustainable peace and security remains contingent on strengthened cooperation and mutual trust. We commend the efforts of regional partners, the African Union, ESC, and SADC, as well as international initiatives. We also extend our appreciation to the Special Envoy for his continued engagement through good offices amid the evolving crisis in Eastern DRC. We emphasize the importance of aligning and coordinating mediation efforts with ongoing regional processes to ensure complementarity and amplifying the impact of peace-building initiatives. This coordination should also translate into unified support for the effective implementation of agreements reached. It is essential to preserve the progress achieved and gains made and build on the foundations laid, particularly through the Luanda and Nairobi processes. We thank the President of Angola for his efforts and congratulate President Nassimbe of Togo on his appointment as the new African Union mediator, wishing him success in this role. Mr. President, the PSC framework remains essential for stable peace in the Great Lakes. Its revitalization and implementation are vital for regional stability, with addressing the root causes of the conflict at its core. Addressing the underlying drivers of recurring violence and instability has to remain at the center of peace initiatives. Illicit exploitation of natural resources, historical grievances, and ethnic tensions are some of the issues that must be effectively addressed. We continue to encourage countries in the region towards progress in the implementation of the regional mineral certification mechanism of the International Conference on the Great Lakes region. We should not allow global digital and green energy transitions to contribute to regional divisions in resource management. Governments and the private sector have a key role to play in promoting sustainable and ethical resource extraction across value chains. We also call on parties to refrain from divisive rhetoric and escalatory actions that would undermine hard-won progress and impede the path to stability. We urge all states to continue engaging in confidence-building and trust-enhancing measures. In conclusion, Mr. President, the tide of instability and violence has created a dire humanitarian situation that resonates most through the suffering of civilians throughout the region. The surging humanitarian needs, worsening food insecurity, mass displacement, health crisis, and an alarming rise in human rights violations and abuses stand as stark testaments to this grim reality. The impact on children, with its long-term implications for the future of the region, is particularly devastating. It remains imperative to reach a viable political solution that will halt further escalation of conflict. Slovenia reaffirms its commitment to support initiatives aimed at restoring stability and ensuring that the welfare of civilians is prioritized. I thank you.
I would like to thank the representative of Slovenia for her statement, and I give the floor to the permanent representative of Panama. You have the floor, sir.
Gracias.
Thank you, Mr. President. We are grateful for the participation of His Excellency Tete Antonio, Minister for External Relations of the Republic of Angola and Chairperson of the Executive Council of the African Union, of Her Excellency Ms. Therese Kayikwamba Wagner, State Minister, Minister for Foreign Affairs, International Cooperation and Francophonie of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. They honor us with their participation. At the same time, we acknowledge the participation of the distinguished representatives of Rwanda and Kenya. We are grateful for the report provided by the SESG for the Great Lakes region, Huang Xia. His commitment is crucial at this critical juncture for stability in the region. We also are grateful to the contributions provided by the Distinguished Executive Director of UNICEF, Ms. Catherine Russell. Panama is deeply concerned at renewed offensives by the armed group M23 with the support of the FDLR and the fighting which continues to worsen security in the east of the DRC. This situation threatens to reverse progress achieved under the Peace, Security and Cooperation Framework for the DRC and the Great Lakes region. We are dismayed by the tragic worsening of the humanitarian crisis and the indescribable suffering of the civilian population. We are particularly alarmed at the persistent conflict-related sexual violence, which disproportionately affects Congolese women and children. This was cruelly and dramatically expressed to us by Ms. Catherine Russell. The magnitude of human rights and IHL violations cannot be ignored, and we warn with concern about the real risk of a regional escalation. Panama calls for compliance with Resolution 2773, and we urge M23 immediately to lay down their weapons and to dismantle their illegitimate administrative structures and to withdraw from all occupied areas and to commit to authentic and constructive dialogue. We echo the appeal of heads of state of the East African community, SADC and the AU for an immediate ceasefire. We urge all parties to comply with the provisions of the joint EAC-SADC communique from the 8th of February, including the reopening of the Goma airport and roads which are needed for the delivery of humanitarian assistance. We firmly condemn deliberate attacks against civilians and human rights violations committed by all armed groups present in the east of the DRC. Panama therefore welcomes the decision taken by the Human Rights Council to establish an urgent fact-finding mission to investigate the serious violations which have taken place in North and South Kivu. All parties must strictly respect the principles of international humanitarian law and human rights law. We urge the DRC and Rwanda to resume political dialogue. This is the only way to achieve a lasting solution to the crisis. Having said that, we acknowledge the efforts promoted under the EAC SADC peace process, as well as the brave initiatives towards mediation by the Emir of Qatar. We also welcome the efforts of President João Lourenço over the past several years. Mr. President, the Peace Security Cooperation Framework remains the most complete instrument for addressing the root causes of regional instability. That notwithstanding, in light of the new challenges, including the appearance of additional armed actors, emerging geopolitical interests, and growing interethnic tensions, we believe it is timely to initiate a review process of this framework in order to bring it up to date. This is a turning point, and we urge state signatories to support revitalization of the framework, reaffirming respect for sovereignty, territorial integrity, and a commitment not to provide direct or indirect support to armed groups. Let us hope, in addition to that, there will be an urgent meeting of the 12th Regional Oversight Mechanism of the PSC framework to address the roots of instability in the DRC and to strengthen regional cooperation. We recognize as a step in the right direction the decision to unify the Luanda and Nairobi peace processes. This merger can facilitate more effective coordination, promote dialogue between the DRC and armed groups, and reduce bilateral tensions. Looking to the future, Panama believes it essential to consolidate a coherent peace architecture, which will include various regional efforts and ensure complementarity, and which will take advantage of progress achieved. Stability in the east of the DRC and the entire Great Lakes region depend on our collective capacity to do the work. Finally, President, we urgently appeal to the international community to mobilize necessary resources so that we can address the growing humanitarian needs. At the same time, we encourage greater investment in sustainable development programs to bolster the resilience of populations and to contribute to addressing the structural causes of the conflict. Thank you. I thank the Permanent Representative of Panama for that statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. Let me start by thanking Special Envoy Shea and Executive Director Russell for briefing us today, as well as Foreign Minister Tete Antonio on behalf of the African Union. We also welcome the participation of DRC Foreign Minister Wagner to our meeting and the representatives of Kenya and Rwanda. President, this month we commemorate 31 years since the genocide against the Tutsi. During this time, we honour the memory of those who lost their lives and recognise the remarkable resilience shown by the people of Rwanda. I will make 3 points. First, the United Kingdom remains deeply concerned at the situation in Eastern DRC. We regret that despite the unanimous adoption by this Council of Resolution 2773 almost 2 months ago, it remains far from being implemented. While the withdrawal of M23 and Rwandan Defence Forces from Walikale is a positive step, much more needs to be done. We reiterate this Council's call for the M23 to cease hostilities and withdraw from all controlled areas, and for the Rwandan Defence Forces to cease support for the M23 and withdraw from Congolese territory. We call on the parties, in line with Resolution 2773, to agree an immediate and unconditional ceasefire and to seriously engage with regional peace processes. Second, the United Kingdom welcomes regional leadership towards a durable resolution of the conflict. We welcome the nomination of President Gnassingbé of Togo as the African Union's mediator for the peace process for Eastern DRC. We hope this will support coordination between regional and international efforts to deliver peace. And we urge the parties to engage with his efforts and urgently implement the EAC SADC roadmap to attain sustainable peace and security. Third, the United Kingdom is deeply concerned by the scale of human suffering from the conflict in Eastern DRC, as set out by our briefers, and its impact on the region. More than 1 million people have been displaced since the start of the year. We repeat our calls for all parties to respect international humanitarian and human rights law and to allow safe and unimpeded passage of humanitarian assistance by lake, road, and through the reopening of key airports, including Goma and Kavumu. We also support greater UN and donor coordination to ensure assistance reaches those most in need. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for his statement, and I give the floor to the permanent representative of China.
Thank you, President. I thank SRSG Xiahua, Executive Director Russell, and Chairperson Antonio for their briefings. We welcome Her Excellency Kai Kwamba, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the DRC and a permanent representative of Rwanda and Kenya to this meeting. Recently, amid the ongoing offensive by the M23, conflict in the eastern DRC has escalated, plunging the entire Great Lakes region into instability. This surge in violence has raised widespread concerns about the potential for broader conflict, threatening to undo more than a decade of efforts aimed at fostering stability and prosperity in the region. The international community must act swiftly and collaboratively to reverse this alarming trend before it deepens further. I would like to make 3 points. First, an immediate ceasefire must be secured to prevent further escalation of the conflict. As long as fighting persists in the eastern DRC, lasting peace in the Great Lakes region will remain elusive. Last February, the Security Council unanimously adopted Resolution 2773, calling on all parties to immediately achieve ceasefire. Regional leaders from the AU, EAC, and SADC echoed this call. China strongly urges the M23 to comply with the ceasefire requirements set forth by the Council and regional organizations, and to immediately stop all military expansion and unconditionally withdraw from all occupied areas. China calls on all relevant countries to respect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of their neighbors, in line with the principles of the Addis Ababa Framework Agreement. And all forms of support for arms groups operating in the DRC must stop. We hoped all countries in the region will refrain from actions that could heighten tensions and will work together towards building mutual trust and de-escalation of the situation. Second, it is essential to support regional processes and pursue a political solution. There's no military solution to the conflict in the eastern DRC. Political negotiation remains the only way out. Recently, leaders from the EAC and SADC have convened 2 joint summits outlining a roadmap for resolving the crisis and establishing a coordinator group to guide the process. Qatar has facilitated a trilateral meeting between the leaders of the DRC and Rwanda in Doha, And there have been direct contacts between the DRC government and M23. All these are encouraging and positive developments. China hopes that Luanda and Congo and the DRC will sincerely respond to the mediation efforts by regional and international partners, resolve each other's security concerns through dialogue, and reach a lasting peace plan at an early date. The international community should continue to support Africa solutions to African problems and call on the AU, EAC, SADC, and partners outside the region to strengthen mutual coordination. China appreciates SRSG Xia Huang's active shuttle diplomacy and encourages him to strengthen support for regional peace efforts. Third, it is crucial to adopt a comprehensive approach to address the root causes of conflict and instability. The recurring outbreaks of violence in the Great Lakes region over the past decades underscore that the underlying issues remain unresolved. The international community must adopt comprehensive measures to support the countries in the Great Lakes region in systematically addressing the root causes of security deficits, governance deficiencies, and unbalanced development. We should support countries in the region in strengthening the governance of natural resources and advancing mutual beneficial cooperation so that these resources become a true driver of peace and development. The Addis Ababa Framework Agreement remains the most comprehensive mechanism for addressing the root causes of conflicts in the region. Given the current situation, revitalizing this crucial instrument has become all the more necessary and urgent. China calls on all signatories to reaffirm their commitments to the agreement and inject new momentum into regional peace. President, China and Africa have always been good friends, good partners, and good brothers with a shared destiny. Guided by the principles of sincerity, real results, affinity, and good faith, China actively works with countries in the Great Lakes region to support their efforts in maintaining peace and stability, fostering independent and resilient development, and steadily advancing towards modernization. China will continue to deepen comprehensive cooperation with countries in the region and contribute to the long-term peace, development, and prosperity throughout the region. I thank you.
I thank the Permanent Representative of China for that statement. I give the floor to the representative of Greece.
Mr. President, I would like to start by thanking Special Envoy Zia, Ms. Catherine Russell, Executive Director of UNICEF, as well as His Excellency Mr. Tete Antonio, Foreign Minister of Angola, for their comprehensive updates. And I would also like to welcome the participation of Her Excellency, the Foreign Minister of the Democratic Republic of Congo, Ms. Therese Kawikamba Wagner, as well as the representatives of Rwanda and Kenya. Mr. President, allow me to emphasize the following points. First, the implementation of Resolution 2773 is urgently needed. M23 must immediately cease hostilities and withdraw from Goma, Bukavu, and all other controlled areas. Greece resolutely opposes any violations of international law and the UN Charter and stresses its strong commitment to the sovereignty, independence, unity, and territorial integrity of the DRC. Second, we call for urgent de-escalation. A spillover of the conflict and destabilization within the Great Lakes region must be averted. Rwanda and DRC must re-engage immediately in the political dialogue and implement all decisions and commitments agreed under the Luanda and Nairobi processes. Facilitation by regional actors and coordination with relevant stakeholders at regional and sub-regional organizations are key for an immediate and unconditional ceasefire. We encourage all parties and mediators in this direction. Third, we are deeply concerned about the grave humanitarian and security consequences of the M23 offensive, both in North and South Kivu, that have led to a further and mounting increase of IDPs in the Great Lakes region. Women and girls, being the main victims of this conflict, are severely affected by one of the largest forced displacements in the world, and at the same time by natural disasters in the region that are exacerbated by the climate change. Fourth, we believe that mobilization of women leaders can be significant in the Great Lakes. On the one hand, we stress the need to include women and youth in climate, peace and security strategies, and to strengthen their role within community-driven initiatives and sustainable practices in order to mitigate the consequences of climate change and to face food and water insecurity and environmental degradation in the Great Lake region. Equally, echoing the Secretary General in his report, we stress that a meaningful and active participation of women in the political and peace processes is a key element for sustainable peace in the Great Lakes region. We believe that women can have a pivotal role for the success of DDR and DDCRS plans, especially for forcibly recruited children and the respective community development objectives, and they can lead the efforts for a regional integration and a way out of the crisis for the Great Lakes region. Mr. President, in closing, we align with the Secretary General on his assessment that establishing a political dialogue and building trust among countries in the Great Lakes region is of critical importance, and we fully support his call to the signatory countries for the revitalization of the peace, security and cooperation framework for lasting peace and stability in the region. I thank you.
I would like to thank the representative of Greece for his statement, and I give the floor to the representative of the Republic of Korea. You have the floor.
Mr. President, I extend my gratitude to the Special Envoy Huang Xia and the UNICEF Executive Director Russell for their comprehensive briefing. I also welcome His Excellency Tete Antonio, Minister for the External Relations and the Chairperson of the Executive Council of the African Union, and also welcome Her Excellency Teresa Kaikawamba Wagner, State Minister of the Foreign Affairs, and also welcome the representatives of the Rwanda and the Kenya to this meeting. The situation in Eastern DRC is perilous. The M23's recent offensive and subsequent territorial and illegitimate administrative control continue to threaten the stability of the Great Lakes region as a whole. Let me highlight the 3 points. First, Republic of Korea emphasizes the importance of the regional processes in achieving a political solution to the conflict in Eastern DRC. We commend and support the recent regional efforts led by the EAC and SADC. We look forward to the coordinated involvement of the panel of facilitators and newly appointed AU mediator, President Nasingbe of Togo. It will be crucial for their engagement to build upon the significant contribution of the President Lorenzo of Angola through Rwanda process. Qatar's mediation efforts have also been important and should continue complementing African-led regional initiatives. Progress cannot be achieved without the M23 immediately ceasing hostilities and withdrawing from controlled territories. We urgently call on all parties to agree on a ceasefire as mandated by the Resolution 2773 and to refrain from escalating conflict by supporting armed groups. Respect for the sovereignty and territorial integrity remains a fundamental principle of the UN Charter. We further encourage countries of the Great Lakes region to maintain constructive engagement, addressing bilateral differences that would contribute to the long-term regional cooperation and stability in the DRC. Second, we express deep concern over deteriorating humanitarian and human rights situation due to recurring cycle of violence. We are particularly alarmed by reports of the abductions, summary executions, and forced recruitment of children by the M23. Disturbing fact that 40% of sexual and gender-based violence victims are children demands our urgent attention and action. We unequivocally condemn all such grave violations against children. All parties must adhere to international humanitarian law and human rights law. Accountability must be ensured to bring an end to impunity. We look for the Human Rights Council's fact-finding mission contributing significantly to this end. It is within this context that Republic of Korea contributed $5 million to the DRC last year through UNICEF and UNDP to support the implementation of the humanitarian action for children and response to the gender-based violence. Third, revitalizing the peace, security, and cooperation framework is essential to addressing the root causes of the conflict through the Great Lakes region. We commend the Special Envoy Huang Xia's continued dedication and reiterate calls from the Guarantors Institution for convening a regional oversight mechanism meeting. Moreover, the increasing extent of illegal exploitation and trade of natural resources demonstrate an undeniable link with the inability and persistent tensions in the region. We call for the enhanced measures to ensure transparency and traceability of mineral exports. In conclusion, Mr. President, Republic of Korea recognizes the indispensable role of the countries of the Great Lakes region in achieving stability in Eastern DRC. We reaffirm our unwavering support for Special Envoy Huang Xia and the regional organizations and remain firmly committed supporting regional initiatives to promote sustainable peace and stability across the region. I thank you.
Je remercie.
I thank the representative of the Republic of Korea, and I give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation. You have the floor, madam. We would like to thank the Special Envoy of the Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Huang Xia, and also the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Angola, and the representative of the chairperson of the Executive Council of the African Union, Mr. Tete Antonio. We also welcome the Minister of Foreign Affairs for the DRC, Ms. Teresa Vanga, and the representatives of Rwanda and Kenya. From the beginning of this year, the situation in the Great Lakes region, to our great regret, deteriorated significantly. The escalation of the conflict in the east of the DRC as a result of the renewal of attacks by the M23 group with external support has brought the region to the brink of an interstate armed conflict. Such a turn of events due to missed diplomatic opportunities is precisely what we all feared. However, political options for settling the crisis are still on the table. They're enshrined in the key provisions of Security Council Resolution 2773 and are well known to the parties. Unfortunately, for some strange reason, the parties have chosen to ignore this document that is legally binding in nature. We believe this choice to be a mistake. The M23 should withdraw from the communities they've seized and from the occupied territories. The support for M23 and also interaction with the Democratic Forces for the Liberation of Rwanda should stop. The implementation of this resolution by Rwanda and the DRC is the quickest way of stopping hostilities and hammering out lasting and viable parameters for peace agreements. It's important for the basic parts of Resolution 2773 still be based on regional so-called recipes for stabilizing the situation. They're enshrined in the roadmap of the East African Community and the Southern African Development Community, which contains practical steps to settle the crisis and which serves as a guide point for work of the group of mediators at the high level. We support the decision of our African colleagues to merge the Luanda and Nairobi tracks. We hope that this will help to develop real measures to cease any state interaction with illegal armed formations in the Great Lakes region. We believe that the efforts of the Qatari mediators are seeking this too, and we also support this. Armed conflict does not meet the core interests of states of the region and cannot address the deep-seated disagreements between them. Hostilities only serve to increase civilian suffering, primarily in the eastern provinces of the DRC. From January this year, the number of refugees from eastern DRC going to neighboring Burundi and Uganda has increased by 100,000. And there are more than 500,000 IDPs. Millions of people need medical and food assistance. Kigali and Kinshasa should harness every opportunity to them, demonstrate political wisdom, and resolve their differences around the negotiation table so that ordinary people stop suffering. In conclusion, we would like to underscore that all the key parameters for a lasting interstate cooperation have long been agreed upon by the states of the Great Lakes region as part of the Framework Agreement for Peace, Security and Cooperation. There is a need to reiterate countries' commitments to this fundamental document whose pertinence has been proven by events in recent months. We support the work of the Special Envoy of the Secretary-General Juan Xia to assist in this area. We note his efforts to decrease tensions in the region. From our side, we will continue to contribute to developing constructive dialogue between all countries in the Great Lakes region in order to find balanced and long-term solutions to regional problems in line with the UN Charter. Thank you very much.
Je remercie Madame la représentante.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for her statement, and now give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President.
I'd like to thank Special Envoy Huang Xia, Executive Director Catherine Russell, and Foreign Minister Tete Antonio for your briefings today. The United States remains deeply concerned by the situation in eastern DRC, and we strongly condemn the continued violence, including by M23. We urge all parties to immediately cess hostilities and to hold accountable those responsible for human rights abuses. As Resolution 2773 calls for, M23 must fully withdraw from all territory of which it is taking control. Rwanda must cease support for M23 and withdraw all troops from the DRC. We are encouraged by M23 and RDF withdrawal of forces from Walikale. We call on Rwanda to respect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the DRC and further call on all countries in the region to do the same. We are encouraged by the DRC's willingness to hold direct talks with the M23. Mr. President, a cohesive African-led process remains the most viable path toward a lasting solution, and we hope the UN's good offices, broad mandates, and vast institutional knowledge in the Great Lakes can be brought to bear to support these regional peace initiatives. Greater coordination between regional and UN mechanisms is needed to prevent forum shopping and duplication of efforts. We reject any action by the parties to delay commitments, amass negotiating leverage, or distract the international community from further escalation. We welcome Special Envoy Xia's use of his position to assist regional countries and organizations in their efforts toward peace. 12 years after its adoption, the Peace, Security, and Cooperation Framework remains far from both being fully implemented and realizing its foundational goal of ending recurring cycles of violence in this region. While root causes persist, the United States remains committed to supporting an end to this conflict. We believe the Great Lakes region has immense potential for shared prosperity through enduring peace and stability. That is why the United States sent a recent high-level delegation to the region. But this conflict must end. Only then will the region be able to unlock its full potential. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Merci.
I thank the representative of the United States for that statement. I now give the floor to the permanent representative of Denmark.
And I also thank Special Envoy Shea, Executive Director Russell, and His Excellency Foreign Minister Antonio for their briefings today. I'd also like to welcome the participation of Foreign Minister Wagner of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, as well as the representative of Rwanda and Kenya here today. Mr. President, the picture our briefers have painted here today is a complex one. From protracted crisis and displacement to political instability and fragile institutions, the situation demands our urgent and unified attention. Allow me to make 3 points. First, there's an urgent need for a cessation of hostilities in Eastern DRC and the full implementation of Resolution 2773. Denmark has, along with other Council members, stressed this point in the last many meetings. Specifically, the M23 must hold and reverse its territorial control and the establishment of parallel administrations. The DRC must effectively neutralize the FDLR. Rwanda must withdraw its forces from DRC territory and cease its support to M23. These demands have made on multiple occasions, and we reiterate them firmly today. With humanitarian needs and displacement on the rise, there is an urgent need to immediately de-escalate and diffuse tensions between the parties. Second, we welcome any efforts towards promoting sustainable peace in the DRC and the Great Lakes region. We note positively the meetings between the DRC and Rwanda on 18 March and the efforts to facilitate further meetings between the parties in Doha. It is our hope that these steps will complement and be coordinated with the peace process initiated and led by the ESC, SADC, and the African Union. The UN system, including the Special Envoy and MONUSCO, can offer a wealth of expertise to mediation efforts as well as transitional justice. We urge all parties to utilize this resource, as well as the collective knowledge and capacity of all the actors in the region in pursuit of a ceasefire and ultimately an inclusive and comprehensive peace agreement. Such an agreement must address hate speech and xenophobia and foster long-term community cohesion. Additionally, we underline that the full, equal, and meaningful participation of women is central. We commend the efforts undertaken by, amongst others, the Office of Special Envoy Shea, the ICGLR, and President Lorenzo of Angola to empower women and youth in the region in collaboration with the Congolese authorities, and we encourage further action in this regard. Third and finally, many of the Great Lakes region's challenges are exacerbated by the adverse effects of climate change. This includes food insecurity, water scarcity, environmental degradation, and competition over natural resources. We encourage the implementation of comprehensive climate adaptation strategies and the promotion of conflict resolution mechanisms that address the root causes of resource competition. Mr. President, in closing, in order to rebuild trust across the region, all parties must uphold the core principles of the peace, security, and cooperation framework. Principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity, and desisting from tolerating, aiding, and supporting armed groups. All parties must demonstrate the political will to address the drivers of conflict, and Denmark supports the revitalization of the framework. It is time for a renewed commitment to political dialogue and a unified approach to peace with protection of civilians at the center. The Security Council and the international community must continue to stand in solidarity with the people of the region, ensuring that both the humanitarian needs and the root causes of the conflict are addressed effectively. I thank you.
I thank the permanent representative of Denmark for her statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Pakistan.
President, I thank the Special Envoy of the Secretary General for the Great Lakes region, Mr. Huang Xia, for his briefing and assessment of the situation. We greatly appreciate and support the diplomatic efforts of the Special Envoy in the fulfillment of his mandate on the implementation of the 2013 Peace, Security and Cooperation Framework for the Democratic Republic of the Congo and the Great Lakes region. We also thank Ms. Catherine Russell, Executive Director of UNICEF, for her remarks and valuable inputs, highlighting the harrowing humanitarian situation in DRC. We welcome the participation of the foreign ministers of Angola and DRC and the representatives of Rwanda and Kenya in the meeting. Mr. President, the situation in eastern DRC has reached a critical juncture. M23's takeover of Sake, Goma and Bukavu and its continued advance in defiance of Security Council resolution and African regional mediation processes threatens regional and international peace and security. It has increased the risk of a wider escalation in the Great Lakes region. The situation demands immediate, concrete, and effective action. We cannot afford to procrastinate while the prospects of a full-blown regional conflict grow. In order to de-escalate the situation, we call for an immediate ceasefire and withdrawal of uninvited foreign forces from the eastern DRC territories, and also the neutralization of FDLR as agreed in CONOPS under Luanda process. The M23 must immediately lay down arms, dismantle parallel administrations, and withdraw from territories controlled by it, as demanded by the Security Council. Resolution 2773 must be implemented fully, in letter and spirit. We urge the DRC and Rwanda to return to the negotiating table to find a political solution to the crisis. Dialogue and diplomacy are the only way forward. The efforts undertaken by President Lourenço of Angola, the former president of Kenya, the EAC SADC peace process, as well as the mediation initiative between the DRC and Rwanda conducted by His Highness the Emir of Qatar, are timely and crucial. We support the merged Luanda-Nairobi peace processes and the appointed panel of facilitators and the designation of the President of Togo as the new AU mediator for DRC. It is regrettable that the M23 has refused to come to the table despite DRC government's agreement to hold such talks. M23 must engage with the DRC government in good faith and in earnest. All these complementary diplomatic processes must move the parties toward an immediate ceasefire, leading to a long-term and sustainable solution to the underlying issues. It is imperative to secure the implementation of the Security Council's resolution, address the root causes, including illegal exploitation of natural resources, and cater to the deepening humanitarian crisis in DRC, especially violence against women and children, ensuring the unimpeded supply of life-saving and life-sustaining relief and supplies to those in need. All parties are under obligation to respect international humanitarian law. Violators must be held to account. Mr. President, we believe that MONUSCO has an important role to play for the promotion of peace and stability. We have taken note of the EAC SADC Summit's recommendation that the mission's capacity be reinforced, enabling it to play a role in ceasefire monitoring and securitization efforts in the region. The mission would need to be adequately strengthened and equipped to discharge its current as well as modified mandate in the future, in consultation with the government of DRC. Given the recent intensive engagement of the Council, together with the involvement of the African Union and other sub-regional mechanisms and engagement by leaders from the continent and beyond, we are of the view that it will be in the interest of DRC and Rwanda, and in fact the wider region, to benefit from this environment by demonstrating political will and genuine commitment and cooperation to lay the foundation of durable peace and stability in the Great Lakes region. I thank you very much.
Je remercie Monsieur le représentant.
I thank the representative of Pakistan for his statement. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as representative of France.
Son soutien envers l'action des Nations Unies dans la région.
I thank the Special Envoy of the Secretary General and humanitarian actors and the Executive Director of UNICEF. I thank Mr. Huang Xia and the Executive Director of UNICEF, Ms. Catherine Russell, for their statements, in particular for their actions. I thank Minister Tete Antonio for the elements he provided as chairperson of the African Union, and I welcome the presence among us of the State Minister of the DRC. 4 messages from France today. Firstly, the horrors that far too many children are facing and witnessing, the humanitarian situation calls for action. As Ms. Russell pointed out, the ongoing conflict is devastating the lives of hundreds of thousands of children in the east of the DRC. Documented by UNICEF, the scope of rape and sexual violence involving children is shocking. The situation is worsened further by the offensives carried out by the M23 since January with the support and participation of the Rwandan Defense Forces. These hostilities must end so that violations of IHL and human rights end, as well as an end to summary executions of children, their recruitment by armed groups, systemic sexual violence, and all other serious violations of the rights of children. These must not go unpunished. Secondly, as outlined in Resolution 2773, a ceasefire is imperative. Despite the many efforts, fighting continues, fueling the risk of a regional expansion of the conflict. SADC and EAC reminded us of the need for a ceasefire during their joint appeal on the 8th of February, and the Security Council unanimously reaffirmed that in Resolution 2773. The Congolese and Rwandan presidents have declared their commitment last month. We must not wait any longer. Once concluded, a ceasefire must be monitored through a credible verification mechanism, and MONUSCO must be prepared to play a role here. We call on Rwanda to put an end to the illegal presence of its forces on the territory of another sovereign state. Thirdly, given this urgent situation, France supports the initiatives for dialogue. In particular, it supports the regional mediation efforts provided by the African Union, the East African Community, and SADC. These organizations have a key role to play in contributing to a cessation of hostilities, to a de-escalation of the crisis, and in finding a political solution through the unified Luanda and Nairobi processes. The appointment of President Faure Gnassingbé of Togo as the new AU mediator must make it possible to pursue the momentum set by President João Lourenço, and I welcome his efforts. We must implement the agreed parameters for an immediate withdrawal and definitive withdrawal of the Rwandan Defense Forces from Congolese territory and the demobilization of the FDLR by the DRC. The initiatives for dialogue by civil society, we believe, are essential. I'm referring to initiatives such as that provided by SENCO, the National Episcopal Conference of Congo, and the Church of Christ of Congo for a social compact for peace in the DRC and the Great Lakes. I thank the efforts of the Special Envoy to promote regional efforts, in particular tracing of natural minerals. Fourthly, all efforts must converge. We must support all of these efforts so that we can ensure a lasting political resolution as soon as possible. Last week, France, as President of the Council, organized informal discussions with Angola, Kenya, Zimbabwe, Qatar, and the United Nations in order to work towards aligning and coordinating these initiatives. We must act to ensure an effective ceasefire and the opening of humanitarian corridors, as well as the reopening of the Goma airport and the full implementation of Resolution 2773. There is no military solution to this conflict. Negotiations must be concluded so that we can put an end to this crisis and work towards peace and shared prosperity in the region. The Council must remain actively involved towards that end, and we must be prepared to shoulder our responsibilities in the absence of progress. Thank you, and I resume my function as President of the Council.
And I give the floor to the Permanent Representative of Kenya. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank the briefers for their insightful updates on the evolving situation in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Kenya takes note of both the progress achieved but also the significant challenges that persist in the implementation of the peace, security, and cooperation framework for the DRC and the region. This framework continues to exemplify the potential of conflict resolution when local ownership and leadership is supported through regional facilitation and international solidarity. Despite the commendable and sustained peace efforts by regional and international actors, my delegation is gravely concerned that the situation in Eastern DRC continues to deteriorate. The continued loss of lives, destruction of livelihoods, and mass displacement, both internally and across the border, are stretching the social fabric and infrastructure of host communities while further destabilizing the region. Mr. President, Kenya maintains that there can be no military solution to this crisis. There is an urgent need for renewed commitment and tangible action on the ground. We therefore call on all parties to immediately cease hostilities, exercise maximum restraint, and commit to the ongoing political process. An inclusive, sustained dialogue that addresses both the proximate causes and structural drivers of the conflict is the only viable path to durable peace. In this regard, we underscore the centrality of the Nairobi-Luanda process, a unified African-led initiative jointly anchored by the East African Community and the Southern African Development Community, SADC. On 1st of April 2025, His Excellency President William Ruto, the President of the Republic of Kenya in his capacity as EAC Chair, convened the inaugural virtual briefing with the appointed panel of facilitators. This reflects the deep regional commitment to restoring peace through the Congolese homegrown solutions grounded in the principles of sovereignty, territorial integrity, and regional cooperation. Mr. President, in our capacity as Chair of the East African Community, we recognize the constructive role of international partners, including Qatar, whose support to dialogue is commendable. We also recognize the role that MONUSCO can play in providing logistical support to the joint EAC and SADC regional mechanisms as they embark on monitoring and verifying the ceasefire. However, such efforts must complement and not supplant African-led frameworks. Ensuring coherence and alignment with regional initiatives is critical for legitimacy and effectiveness. Kenya stands in firm solidarity with our brothers and sisters in the Democratic Republic of Congo and remains committed to supporting them in their pursuit of peace, security, and stability. Kenya will continue to engage both bilaterally and through regional mechanisms to contribute meaningfully to efforts aimed at achieving a comprehensive and sustainable solution to the ongoing conflict. We call upon this Council to remain resolute in its support for mediation efforts and to urge all stakeholders to engage in good faith. Peace is within reach if we act with unity, urgency, and determination. I thank you.
I would like to thank the Permanent Representative of Kenya for that statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. I would like to thank the briefers who kindly joined us in this meeting, and the meeting stands adjourned.